Be with you.
And also with you.
My God, we thank you for a new day as we continue into our next segment of the book of Joshua. We pray that you would be with our conversations, both here today and also as a church, following up the conversations from last night about what's happening in our country and how we respond as a community. Be with us this day and all days. Amen. Did everybody get a handout here? Okay, all right. So unfortunately, today will not be as interactive as we were last week. But I thought last week was a lot of fun. And that was about all my creative energy went through what we did last week when I thought about what we would do in Joshua. Today, though, we are going to have multiple discussion points. We're also not going to have a song today. And you'll see why when we unfold what we're going to be reading today. Here we are through Joshua, and then we'll eventually go into the book of Judges. I just wanted to make a note. We will be meeting next week. We will still be together, and so here's our little picture. I think I sent this in the email. If you want to come Wednesday night, because you'll already be here to get ashes at 7 p.m., I might commend to you to come on Wednesday. Then you can free up your whole Thursday as you begin your Lenten fast. And so, but if you want to come on Wednesday, we will wrap up and kind of ascend together to go and get ashes. And I'm going to bring a veggie tray. So I don't think vegetables count when you fast. And so, but we will do that next week. Usually I have tried to find a little bit of a theme, and if you read today's ones, you might have realized wasn't as there was just a lot more battles and weird list, and so we don't have a special theme for today besides the one that we have already stated, that anyone can follow God if you follow the law, and we're going to see that emphasized throughout today's text multiple times, in particular to Joshua's obedience as well as all of Israel's obedience. We pay special attention to how they did everything that Yahweh commanded of them. We'll see that repeated a few times. If you have missed a few weeks, in this week's presentation, I have put a summary of every chapter. That is just for me to make it a little bit easier when we do our ending one to have summaries. But this is where we were last week. We were in Joshua chapter 6, which is the story of Jericho. And I told you this last week, but the chapter, it states what they're supposed to do, and then it repeats the very same thing. And that is a way of saying they did everything that God commanded them. And so they were to march once every day for 6 days around Jericho, make no noise. And then on the seventh day, they would march 7 times, and then the priests would blow their trumpets, the people would shout, and when they did that, the walls came tumbling down. We also had this example that we gave last week, which was we all had our little foam blocks from the nursery, and I invited everyone to lay hands on their blocks and discuss like what walls need to be torn down today. And then you all got to punch them and knock them down. And I hope you take that as an exercise with you of thinking what walls need to come down. We also introduced this idea. It's a Hebrew word, hirim, which means to utterly destroy or to totally consecrate. And that is something is totally devoted to God. And so what that meant here, did we run out of handouts? Marilyn, do you need a...
There's an empty chair.
You have one? Okay, all right. We do have more too. Okay.
There's an empty chair here, so I put one there.
That's Elijah's chair. So some of you got that joke. And so when they went through Jericho, the soldiers never took any of the spoils. And we talked last week, and I want to just re-emphasize this point for today's material, that in the ancient world, one of the reasons soldiers would engage in battle is because they got paid when they got to reap the spoils of the war. And so usually those who were owed more or had served longer would be at the front when they would go through the raid. But here in Jericho, nothing was supposed to be taken for the people. And so everything was utterly destroyed or totally consecrated like a sacrifice, except some of the metals which would have been saved essentially for the temple or for the tabernacle. We're going to see what happens with that, because in the next chapter, we are introduced to a character called Achan, and he uses his greed. And so we get a little preview before chapter 7 that he takes some of those sacred metals. And then they go out to fight, and Israel loses. And so Joshua ends up lamenting. He tears his robe. God tells him what has happened. And then we're going to see how Achan becomes the punishment, or the one that is Hirim. He and his family are utterly destroyed or totally consecrated. And so it's funny. Poppy was here last week. And I think it was when we had one of our first discussions after this. She came over here and she said, "Papa, that picture up there was really scary." And I was like, "Yes, it was, yeah." So don't be greedy. Don't be the scary picture. Then we got to chapter 8, and we're going to see Ai is going to get destroyed. And I want to revisit with what we talked about here, because we see some of the first strategy that's taking place. And you might remember I tried to put a picture that showed the strategy from some curriculum, and it was too confusing for me to follow. But remember, when they fought this battle, even though they used strategy, Joshua held up his javelin throughout the battle. And so that was another way of saying it was Yahweh, it was God who fought the battle, not just Israel. And that also is going to become a recurrent theme. We ended last week's discussion with reenacting a covenant. And so for those of you here last Wednesday, we did not march around the building, but for those who were here, we marched around different sides of the room. We gave the blessings and the curses, the blessings and the woes, the warnings for what happens when we do not follow God. That gets us into chapters 9 through 12, which I'm curious, how many of you actually read the whole thing? Okay, blessings on you. You had to read every word in chapter 12 for this to count. And if you do, you get 2 cookies. So chapter 9 is this chapter about the Gibeonites. I remember when I was in middle school reading this, and the story of the Gibeonites really fascinated me. And so here's how the NRSV calls this chapter: the Gibeonites saved themselves by trickery. And that's a nice little word for what they do. So this is going to begin with this coalition of kings. So they have heard what has happened to Jericho. They've heard what's happened to Ai. And we're going to see these are those who are south of Jericho and Ai at first. And they go, uh-oh, we have a problem. Because Ai wasn't a big deal, but Jericho was a really big deal. And I just kind of reminded everyone, Jericho was not a one-off. Israel is coming. And so they joined this coalition. This is a preview of what happens to them. They lose, in case you didn't read. And so it's those that are in the highlands, those in the lowlands, those in the coastal lands. This is a way of saying it was everyone. And it was the Hittites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites and the termites. And I underline the Hivites because the Hivites are a people group. Some of them live in a city called Gibeon. And what we'll see in the story too is there is 2 other cities around the Gibeon, and we come to call them the Gibeonites. And I went on like this random trail for an hour trying to figure out why at times they are called the Hivites and why at times they are called the Gibeonites, and nobody had any good answers. And so I'm stepping aside from the podium, and this is the answer I've come up with to make sense in my brain, because it was really confusing, is that you have the Hivites, and then part of them was like those who lived in Gibeon, and for some reason these other 2 towns join with those who lived in Gibeon, and we come to call them the Gibeonites, and they just lost their other name. That's my answer. I found this to be very confusing. I even consulted help from people at seminaries because I was very confused. That's Alexander's answer. So we're going to see this ruse of the Gibeonites. So you'll see in the picture. So they, I'll show you on a map, but Gibeon is I mean, it's the next city that they're coming for. But they pretend like they have come from very, very far away. And so they get old sandals, they get worn out clothes, they take their wine skins, which is made out of animal skin that it cracks and dries as it ages, not because there's not liquid in it, because the oil dries up inside of it. And they take their bread and they get old, crumbly bread. This is a story that's a little bit hard for us to relate to. I've had these shoes for like maybe 2 years or something like that. I wear them almost every day. And they're still, like, there's a little bit of wear and tear. But shoes before modern shoes didn't last as long. I remember when I was in Africa, we would help kids get shoes out of tires. And it was really exciting because once a year, they got a new pair of shoes. And those shoes at the end of the year, made out of rubber tires, which are pretty good. They already had holes in them. And so this is, your shoes don't last as long as ours do. We buy store from the bread. Anybody bake homemade bread? How long does it last? It's like 3 days and it gets moldy. And so you can think about this. The bread doesn't last as long. So it's a way of saying they've traveled. They've traveled for days. It's been a while. And so they come, not only is my bread moldy, it's crumbly, it's falling apart. And so they trick all of them. They do this because they know that the Israelites are not allowed to make treaties or peace or covenants with those who live in the area, because this land is for Israel. They're not, all the people there are supposed to go away. And so the Israelites end up making peace with them. And there's this line in here that's the Israelites did not consult Yahweh or the Lord. So Joshua sees all of them. He says, look, I can see your worn out sandals. I can see your worn out clothes. I can see your crumbly, moldy bread. And even your wine skins are cracked and dried up. You guys must have traveled from a faraway land. It seemed so obvious before him. So they make a covenant. They make peace with them. We're going to continue with the story of the Gibeonites in a minute. But first, we're going to have a discussion question to break out in our small groups. So the Israelites believe the Gibeonites because they saw moldy bread and worn out sandals, but they didn't consult God. When have you been fooled by something that, how something looked on the surface because you didn't take the time to pray about it or think about it first? Another way of asking this question is, when have you acted before you thought? And that came back to bite you. Okay, so I'm going to start this timer so we don't get too far away with this question. Share your best stories.
Human nature to question a million times already. In hindsight, my brother, Well, I got myself in so much trouble over doing this. Together, not working, being retired, you know, like, it's like, where did you put that? Hi, dearest, I really why are you messing with my stuff? Why did you throw away that book? I don't know. Yeah, because I want to ask snarky questions. I just haven't been able to. That's why I was Scott about it first, you know. That's why. With everything going on right now, this is we got together. Well, I have I've never gotten really just made enough.
Yeah. So,
It's not fun. Yeah, I didn't jump in here.
Deuteronomy has some battle in it, and I was like, okay, I was like, and so,
Well, isn't that fun?
we're actually going to have it does, yeah, but it is relevant for our conversations. We're going to have a conversation like that later. So I want to hear some of your stories. I am going to say that was the most lively I've ever seen a discussion question. And I've never seen you all so happy before. With one of my poorly worded questions. Yeah, but not the one I wrote. It was the one that I reworded it. So if anyone has maybe a lighthearted story or also a more serious story that you could share in a bridged version, I would love to hear it because I couldn't pick out anything that anyone was saying because it was so loud in here. Except Connie, I did hear. I did hear you say you don't talk about politics. I think that's like the only thing I caught though. Would anyone have
something they'd want to share?
We were just laughing about how often we speak without thinking,
Yes.
and what a bad habit that is to break.
It is a bad habit to break for sure.
And with Lent coming, our group has taken on a pledge that we're going to focus on not giving up all this stuff, but taking on, trying to be more reflective or
That is
reactive.
so fascinating because I was starting to work on our presentation for next week, and I needed to take a break from doing the presentation, so I was writing, and this is what I did the title of it. That's why I'm giving up fasting for Lent, so I can focus on what I put on and not what I give up. That was what I was thinking about as I came down here.
Could you repeat that last sentence? You're giving up fasting.
So I was just writing, and I said why I'm giving up fasting for Lent, so I can focus on what I'm putting on.
Oh, okay.
That's a little facetious of a joke, but if you weren't here for Sunday morning, it was about the practicing piety, and so it was giving, praying, and then fasting. I was like, that's interesting. When Jesus talks about our righteousness, fasting's at the end and has the smallest amount. And when I think about Lent, it's what I give the most attention to. So I'm trying to make a practice this week to think about the other two parts. Okay, we're gonna move on from this question. Thank you for your laughter and your joy, though. So we are not done with the Gibeonites' story in chapter 9. In fact, the Gibeonites will they are going to show back up throughout the rest of the Old Testament, which we'll make a comment about that in a minute, or in 12 minutes. But 3 days later, the Israelites realized that the Gibeonites were their neighbors. And this is what happens to them. So they made a covenant with them, and Joshua honors that covenant. Covenants are not contracts. We write contracts in our world, which are like legal based. And if something is amiss in the writing of a contract, we can null out contracts. Covenants are not like that. Covenants are not legal documents. They're a ceremony of a relationship. And there's nothing you can do to get rid of covenants. So when we talk about our baptismal covenant, God has claimed you, you are sealed, you are God's own forever. There's nothing that can ever change that. And that's true here with the Gibeonites. They are now in covenant with Israel. Nothing can change them. They're under Israel's protection. And they end up becoming part of Israel. But they end up becoming hewers of wood and drawers of water. Eventually, when we get to them later, they are some of the ones who craft and carve the most beautiful wood pillars that goes into the temple when David and Solomon build the temple. So their story is not over in the book of Joshua. I wanted to show you this picture before we kind of move away. So I had to ask Joy and Joan for some help yesterday because this comes from something called the Joshua Roll, and I didn't know how to attribute it. But it's a 10th century scroll found in the Vatican. And you'll see here, so here's Joshua and the Israelites, which you'll notice are dressed in their war clothes. Here is the Gibeonites, which you'll notice are looking a little bit more humble as they come. And see here, he's like, oh, look at my sandal, look at my clothes and my bread. And it's kind of cut off from the rest of it. You'll also notice up in the sky a sun and a moon. And that's because the Gibeonite story is also connected to chapter 10, which my Bible calls the sun stands still. Has anyone heard this story before about the sun standing still in the sky? I see one head shaking. I see a confused look, a shy hand.
I've heard of it, but I don't remember the context.
Okay, yeah. So this is a story that it's like bizarre there. That like they're fighting this battle, and it says like they're going to win before the sun goes down, and they don't make it when it's 6 p.m. So God's like, I'll just keep the sun up in the sky a little bit longer, and it's like the most bizarre story. And then I forgot about the story. Like when I was reading it, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that happened, and I don't know why we don't talk about it more. And so, also I was going to tell you, not the next two pictures that we're about to look at, but most of the pictures throughout here, I found this kid's comic book. that's about like chapter 10. So I tried to get all the pictures from there. And it was bizarre because it sounded like it was written for like a 9-year-old. Then all the pictures are like the decapitated Canaanites and everything and like blood everywhere. And I'm like, wow, okay. That was a little interesting. Here is a map I wanted to show you. This is just a
Just to go back before you get to
Yeah.
the discovery and the curse, did we talk about that? Were they cursed because they didn't consult God?
So the curse is for the Gibeonites, that they become a slave class, essentially, of people. So they are discovered, and then they are cursed in essence.
Become like slaves?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
So here, it's in verse 23. Now, therefore, you are cursed, and some of you shall always be slaves, woodcutters, and drawers of water for the house of my God. And this is something that lasts a long time for them.
So the Israelites make slaves readily, even though they were tired of being slaves themselves, right? This is just a...
Yes, they do. We are going to have a discussion towards the end related to some of the uncomfortable topics in Joshua too.
They're all uncomfortable. I don't like them.
They are, yes. But remember, the Bible is not the end of the conversation, it's the beginning. And so when you come to stories that make you uncomfortable and it makes you think about it, it's doing its job right. Because it makes us think about what we do today. And we'll have our time for this. I don't know if you can quite see the cities, but here's Jericho, here's Shittim. This is where they camped. They crossed over to Jericho. They went to Ai. After Jericho, they stayed at Gilgal. And there's the city Bethel. And we're cutting like this line between Ai and Bethel, which are these two dots here. This, what we're about to read, is all going to happen down here. And then the next chapter is going to deal with the up there. Just so you see where we are. Here is a picture that sort of shows it. So Joshua's campaign starts off in the middle. It kind of cuts the Canaanites in half so they can't band together. And then they move down first. And then the next chapter will move up. And here's the towns that we're talking about, just so that you see them. So there's these 5. So after the Gibeonites joined together, these 5 kings led by the king in Jerusalem. And also, so there's Jerusalem, there's Hebron, there's these other ones I'm not even going to try to say over here. And so they all are going to join together to go and attack the Gibeonites, which is right here. So you see it's right beside Jericho in Ai. Now, in the ancient world, oftentimes smaller city-states, and in a city-state here, like their jurisdiction is not that big. Actually, I put a fun fact on the back. Some of these old cities, they are 10 to 20 acres. They're pretty tiny, but that's what we're calling these city-states in these kings. They're very small. They're like clans. They're not like kingdoms like we tend to think of kingdoms. But these smaller ones would oftentimes like serve in a hierarchy. So the Gibeonites are now under Israel. So they're like a vassal state. And these 5 kings know that they can't go up against all big Israel, so they're going to go make an example out of the Gibeonites. That's the reasoning for this. They're trying to stop other towns from turning to Israel and joining under their protection and also joining their armies. So they go to fight the Gibeonites. Does that make sense? Like why they're doing that, right? Okay. So the Gibeonites are going to cry out for help to Joshua. We're going to go through some of the story a little bit quicker too, just so you know. And so they're going to cry out to Joshua for help. Joshua, come help us. They're all coming to attack us. We need you to come. And Joshua does. He takes all of Israel, he mobilizes them, and they go to rescue the Gibeonites. And in our story, remember this map, Joshua is going to march them all around through here and go and wipe out these 5 cities. And there's a note here in your Bible that more enemies die from huge stones from heaven than from the sword. Why do you think a note like that might be in there in the story of Joshua?
God's in charge.
Because it's God who fights the battle. There is this reminder that this is God's battle. This is God's war that's happening. Israel is a part of it, but it's God who does it, and God is fighting along the way. And so that's why there is this note. We sort of already mentioned about the sun standing still. And so Joshua here commands the sun to stand still. In case you didn't read it, I'm going to read the verse. It's 12 through 15. On the day when Yahweh gave the Amorites over to the Israelites, Joshua spoke to Yahweh and said in sight of Israel, "Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon." And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. And then there's also some notes about that too. This says that this is a quote from the book of Jasher. I mentioned that in our very, very first week. So Joshua is a book that quotes from other books. We don't have the book of Jasher anymore. It's probably this book of old heroic poems. There is conversations among scholars on which came first. Was this story originally like this folklore kind of story in the book of Jasher? And then Joshua is kind of taking that story. Look what happened there when divine helped us fight. Look, that's what's happening here. Or this story happened and it took a while for the book of Joshua to be written. And so it's quoting from the book of Jasher because it was that important of a story that they made songs about it. And they added stories about it. And now we forget them today. And that's why songs are good to remember. And so the sun here stands still for about a whole day. And it's going to allow for a total victory. This is what the very next verse in that section says. Therefore, no day like that, before it or after it, that the Lord listened to the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. One thing I have said throughout this class is that it's not God who fights for Israel, it's Israel who fights for God. And then I read this verse, and I went, uh-oh, should I take it back? And so I'm just going to say that it does say there was no day like it after. And so we can still use our line. Although what it's saying is that no one has listened. God has not listened like God listened to Joshua here. And this is a testament about Joshua's character. Joshua followed God so much, like throughout the story, and we're going to see it in the rest of the chapters today. Joshua does everything that Yahweh commanded. We even get this line. Everything that Yahweh had commanded to Moses, Joshua even does. That is how much Joshua followed the law, followed what God said, followed the Torah. And so there was no day like this ever before, because no one will ever come again and be like Joshua. Yeah.
Question. How did Joshua become authenticated, or how did he gain his reputation as God's prophet when so many other influences were there? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So many armies, so many different people, so many scattered adventures, so many scattered wars, and how did he emerge as the leader?
So I would say in part, like Joshua's story is a retelling of the Moses story. And so we're going to see, there's a next segment that's going to come up with this again, where he is like Moses, but better. And so like part of why the Joshua story becomes so important is because he's the one who follows Moses. But also like Moses ordains Joshua. So remember the very first time that we meet Joshua, first is the battle where he helps Moses hold up his arms. But the first time we really meet him is when he's one of the spies. And only Joshua and Caleb come back and say, hey, we should follow what God said. We should go in the land now. Moses chickens out, and they have to wait 40 years. Caleb and Joshua are the only ones from that generation. So for one thing, he's the eldest that's going to be leading Israel. But also, like Caleb was never ascended into leadership in the way that Joshua was. And so Moses directly ordains Joshua. Joshua had both political purpose and religious purpose. And so, I think part of it, though, is him being one of the only elders that's still left. Yeah.
If you asked if we heard the story before, and there is a story in Greco-Roman mythology of Zeus stopping the sun in order to allow a hero to complete some heroic
Yes,
task.
yeah.
So this is obviously in the air.
Yes, there's, and some of the other stories in the book of Jasher might have also been these common common ones that float around. And so we're saying, look, but God has done this here. Stories that we know. So, yes.
Something that's probably pretty trite, but it reminded me of God sending the stones.
God sent, oh, yes,
I went back to the manna from heaven. God sent manna.
Oh, yeah, I'd rather God send me bread than a stone.
I would too. But it just kind of made...
I feel like that could have been an example. I might save that for if I ever do Joshua again, which I hope is never. So the next segment, we're going to see what happens to these 5 kings. And so I'll have on a map later, you'll get to see where Mecca is. But remember I showed you where they were chasing around all of the cities. The kings go and they hide. And so Joshua is like, so when you're fighting out on an open plain, everyone has an even playing field. If you're the fleeing party, you go into a cave system. Like you can use different tactics and hide in tunnels, and there's bottlenecks, and you can even out the numbers. So they go in there for a strategic advantage. And it's a little bit funny because Joshua's like, nope, just put some stones over that hole. And so they seal them up in there. And like, you don't really know if this is like for a day, for a few months. But then whatever time period that our story is relaying, they go and conquer the rest of the towns, and then they come back for the kings. And they are executed. They are hanged until sunset at the front so everyone can see. There's a line, too, here about them putting their foot on their necks. So that is a very common tactic. But this is a way of saying they are totally humiliated. They have been totally defeated. These kings are being subjugated by these nomadic tribe that's lived out in the desert. Look at how pathetic they are. That's kind of what it's saying here. My throat just dried up, and if I have to go get water in a second, please excuse me. I think I put this in a fun fact. I might not have. I'm going to blame Susan for this. Put me on an etymology mood about fit versus fought for Joshua, but she emailed me an article or a Wikipedia article about it, and I got an etymology mood. And this idea of putting the foot to the neck may have been where we got the expression about being under someone's thumb, and that's cool. Now you know. Not relevant to this. So really quickly, they are going to go and conquer the rest of the south. So here's Mecca. That's where they hid, so they went and finished out all this other towns, and then they come back up here. And I put a topographical map as well for you to see. So, because it says there went from Kadesh to Gaza, the entire hill country, and the Negev. The Negev is this place down here. It's the desert. You may see it spelled Negev, or Negeb, or Negbv. That's because the ba and the va in Hebrew are the same letter. And so in English we spell it differently, but the Negev. So, and there's this line here, he left no one remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as Yahweh, the God of Israel, had commanded. So this word here is the Harim. All of this has been Harimed. It has been claimed, it's been consecrated as God's, and now as Israel's. Take a breath and get past the Harim part. The focus of this verse is on he did all that Yahweh had commanded. And it's giving us this idea of who Joshua is. Joshua is someone who felt like he was called to this, and Joshua followed it to a T, unlike anyone else before him. And so when we come to the stories of Joshua, we're reminded of a guy that was almost so holy, almost so perfect, so obedient that God would make the sun stand still because Joshua followed the law that much. Now, I want to come back to his story too, because this is when I look for the good in chapter 10. I'm reminded of the Gibeonites. When we were just presented with the Gibeonites, did you get the idea that Joshua was supposed to make a covenant with them? Or was that sort of like a mistake?
I think it was a mistake.
Yeah. It was sort of like a mistake. Like Joshua was not supposed to make a covenant with any of them, but he did. And God honors that covenant. And so when Joshua goes out to rescue the Gibeonites, the sun standing still, like those rocks falling from heaven, this was to save the Gibeonites, who have now turned to Yahweh and have become part of Israel. And so here is the question for that. In chapter 10, Joshua has to rescue the Gibeonites, who had just lied to him in chapter earlier. When has God called you to be strong and courageous for someone you didn't particularly like or someone you didn't trust? Joshua put his neck out for these people that had just lied to him. Israel changed their way of doing things, made covenant with people, and honored that with someone they didn't like and didn't trust. When have you been called to do that too? We're going to limit this conversation to 5 minutes.
I know. Well, I got called into about I told myself, and then when I said what was going on in school, they called me and they asked me to come to my and I just first and I and so I this saving all of that others did things in your administration things that it saved him and pulled him trouble all the time. I trusted him.
But he was
Look, I was taking the high road, so that's a good example of that.
And I took my own, there were reasons, and then after a couple of years, well, I said, I think you're mature enough now, right? But like, it was to be okay. So,
God could have told me to do it on my way for your big daughter to stick out my neck. They've been married since
I know, the bigger they get, the
that's what I decided.
That was our 5 minutes.
I probably should have trusted
I think the Brotherhood has a bell that they ding sometimes. That we could use that. I'm not going to ask you to share these stories with everyone, but I will throw this out there, is that our church had this large discussion last night where this room was filled with people who shared their own voices, their own stories, their own concerns, their own prayers, maybe even their own actions regarding things happening in our country, in particular things with ICE, with Minnesota. People shared more than that too. This is a moment when we can feel like we don't trust people or we don't like people when we begin to share those stories. I hope our church continues in those conversations. And if you take part in them, I hope you can take this with you. Remember to be strong and courageous. Remember how Joshua put his neck out for someone else he didn't like or trust. Yes.
Was that by any chance recorded?
It was purposely not recorded. And we set up Zoom, but it was invite only.
That's smart.
And yes, and I made sure someone was there to moderate it too, because I was upstairs. But no, it was not.
Did you say the bishop calls them out?
No. Someone. I just made sure we had someone to moderate the Zoom
Was the bishop invited?
with comments. I'm sure he knew about it.
Well, was he invited?
I have no idea. He gets our email.
What's
going on there tonight?
Say
That's
again.
not an invitation.
Amy mentioned at the beginning that she had spoke with the bishop earlier.
Oh.
And he had said,
They
"Are you
asked,
doing
they
tonight?"
asked what was going on.
Oh. If you continue in these conversations, though, remember this idea of being strong, courageous, and putting your neck out for someone else. Okay, we're going to continue into our stories here of Joshua and get to chapter 10, which is going to be a little bit familiar to chapter 9. I will say this, after today, we're pretty much done with war in Joshua. So hold on with me for just a second. So we have gone through here last week. We just went down here. Now we're going to move up. I'm also going to go through this a little quickly. We're not going to get too into the details of this. But you'll see after we have read last week's chapter and this week's chapters, why when you see Joshua, he's presented with a sword and a shield a lot, because he was a man of war. That's his legacy, that's his story, that was what he thought was his calling. And throughout all of this, multiple times, there is that reminder of be strong and courageous. And so I feel like this icon is pretty much the best representation that we could get of Joshua. And we're going to see that pop up again here in a minute, the be strong and courageous. Here's a map sort of showing where we're going to be hanging out, which is a little bit blurry. But over here, there's a little sea that we're calling
the Rome, we're going to come back to there. So Jabin, who is the king of Hazar, is going to organize all of the northern kings. And they are described as numerous as the sands on the seashore. You might remember our very first week, we talked a little bit about the geography. I told you about like the Philistines that live over here on the coastal region, and I mentioned the sea people from Phoenicia, or that are coming like from Greece, Macedonia area. So these are people who navigated to this area. Perhaps the Philistines are their descendants. I bring this up because there is more advanced technology that's going to happen in this campaign than there was down here. Namely, we're going to meet chariots for the first time, which is kind of cool. And so we also mentioned too about how Joshua sort of maybe came in stages. We've made a big leap in technology, and this is one of those moments where we kind of get some evidence of Joshua coming from different time spans. But here's a note just about chariots, in case I forget to mention this later. Chariots are cool. Watching the evolution of chariot design and technology is also really fun. Chariots are super heavy, and so like early chariots had one horse, later chariots get two horses, and if you didn't know this, they would like tie swords onto their wheels. And so if you're a foot soldier and you see a chariot, like you can't outrun it, like you just duck or pray, because you are very technologically outmatched. The horse can run faster than you. If you don't get run over by the chariot and the horse, then your legs get sliced by like metal bands, and they would even sometimes drag stuff behind them too. So chariots are scary. And think about like World War I, when there was this big leap in technology, and you have like people who are used to trench warfares suddenly fighting planes and chemical warfare. Like you have made this giant leap. That's the story that we're getting here. And so when we're described as being as numerous as the sands on the seashore, and they have chariots, it should make you a little bit scared. Just a note about that. We're going to revisit about the chariots in a little bit. So all of these kings are going to organize, and they come and they meet here at this water source. That's their battle staging area before they're going to come down. And Joshua is going to get more encouragement from God. And so we see this line again about do not be afraid, be strong and courageous. I am with you. I'm going like to fight as well, like God telling that to Joshua. And so Joshua is going to then take the initiative, and he is going to spring an attack on all of them, which I just wanted to show you this map to see like Joshua's pretty brave because he's now going to be surrounded by all of these foreign towns with advanced technology and chariots. Be terrified. And so we're going to see what's going to happen there. We're going to see yet again that Joshua will do all that Yahweh had commanded of him, which is to hamstring the horses, burn the chariots. And we're going to see that Hazor is going to be burned to the ground. Here's this is a picture of Hazor. I put this as a fact, a fun fact on the back, but you may have already read it before, but most of these cities were 10 to 20 acres. Our archaeological digs of Hazor, it's like 200 acres. So this is like a real city-state. When you think, like imagine a city-state, this is a real one. And Joshua went up against it. He's going up against the empire that's kind of reigning in this area. And so,
do you have any idea what the population of these places was? How many people live there?
I looked that up like 3 weeks ago, and I don't remember now. But I can send that back. I can get you that information.
Wonder how big though.
Yeah, I'll say it's a little difficult too because like when we're writing like with early Bronze Age and the population was a lot lower, but it's like maybe more realistically like with Iron Age stories, and so sometimes that's a little hard. But I had looked it up because I was looking up about that, and it was like south of 50,000 in the whole area. Meaning lower than 50,000 when we're talking about like Bronze Age time. So here's the verse that's here. As I skipped this part. So all of the people get destroyed, and then all that they had is plundered. So unlike the other ones where everything was completely destroyed, now they get to keep the spoils. That means the animals, possibly even their cities, their gold, everything, now the people get to keep. And there's another line yet again, as the Lord had commanded his servant Moses, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. This is a big focus. We're going to come back to this verse, but I want to make another note about the chariots. If you were, you would think that Joshua would have kept the chariots and the horses, but there is lots and lots of reminders and warnings throughout all of the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the book of Kings, the book of Samuel, the book of Chronicles. And we're going to see when Solomon breaks this, but it's to not have chariots and to not have lots of horses. And there's reasons for that. One of those things, and we did talk about this in the very first week, is that it's better to sort of think about Israel as being a confederacy and to not have like a large centralized government, in particular to not have a king, because when you have a king, they lord over you. It talks about this too throughout the Bible. They'll tax you heavily. They'll take your young men into armies, and they would make people engage in these very large service projects like building roads. You don't have chariots and horses without roads. Yeah, people have always been scared of big, scary government that makes you do things. It's way back here too in the story of Joshua and throughout the Old Testament. And so another thing to note too, and we looked at that topographical map, as we're up here in this northern region, there's more plains that you could actually fight with chariots because there's big fields. When you go to the core of Israel, which is in Judah, around Jerusalem, that's the hill country. And so you can't really use the chariots down there. But it's also this warning, because to have a kingdom with lots of horses and chariots, which takes wood and metal and has to be upheld, that's like a very large force. There's this warning against this. They're kind of encouraged to not do that, to not be this big empire focused on conquering. They're supposed to be a people focused on living and loving. Does that sort of make sense too? And so like it seems like Joshua has wasted the animals. They can still use the horses. They just can't run and carry large amount of weights. So they just cut like their hamstring. They'd injure them so they couldn't carry the chariots. And they got rid of the chariots. And so when we see here Joshua does all that was commanded of him, it's this comparison to the future kings. Because remember, the book of Joshua is not finished until the exile. And it's like, look, Joshua didn't keep the chariots and the horses. He did all that Yahweh had commanded. Compare that to Solomon. Solomon was this king that was supposedly filled with all of this wisdom. Give him a few years, and he has thousands of wives and over 10,000 horses, which is what's commanded against to not do. And so we see here how Joshua finishes strong and does all that Yahweh commands of him. I almost put a discussion point here about finishing strong and not just starting strong, but we don't have time for that discussion question. So just remember this, all these other leaders, particularly when we get to the book of Judges, they start strong, they follow what God says, they begin to win those battles, and then they make them their own, and it becomes about them. Think about the story of Gideon. Gideon's the one who took on all of these surrounding armies with 300 men fighting. They took on this, I think in the story it's like 100,000 armies are coming against them. And after he does this and he defeats everyone, he goes and builds a shrine to himself. And it says it becomes an estranglement for generations, the next generation to come, because they praise Gideon and not God. Joshua finishes really strong. And so as we're looking for the good in the story of Joshua, remember how he finishes strong. Any questions on that?
But the strength isn't in numbers. The strength is in obedience to.
Yes, yeah. And being faithful and doing all that God had commanded. Yeah, not strong. He's not making it about him.
Or about armies or chariots
Yeah.
or war machines.
It's about God. Did you have one, Joy? Okay.
Just think.
it's good to think. Here's where we are. So here's Jerusalem. This is where they first crossed. They've come down here. We've moved our way up there, and so this is where he is. This is where they were and had that battle. And we're going to get sort of a repeat in some of these stories, and sometimes these retell the same thing, and some of the details are a little different. It makes it a little bit hard for a presentation. So notice how the other bullet points have gone away. Here we get that God had hardened all of the hearts, and so all of the Canaanites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hittites and the ones that I'm forgetting, like the whatever else there is, all of them come up, and Joshua ends up defeating all of them. And I put an asterisk there. Do you remember who's left? Those of you who don't have a Bible in front of you, do you remember? Who gets left? It says he defeats all of the people. They're all driven out from all of the land except some of the Anakim. Most of the Anakim were driven out, except those in Gaza and Gath and Ashdod. The Anakim are giants. And so if you're reading Joshua, you'd go, wait, how could Joshua have driven out all of the giants from the land if we have David and Goliath? Because we all know the David and Goliath story. And so this is kind of making room for that. The Anakim were the descendants of the Nephilim, which we first see in Genesis 6. They were understood to be these like half divine, half human beings that had like supernatural powers and height and everything. And Goliath was seen as one of those descendants. And so there's a few that get out, and Gaza and Gath, which are over by the coastal region, which is where the Philistines are, which is where Goliath fought. Yes?
Is there any evidence that at one time way back when there were humans that were super big, or is that just all myth?
We have not found skeletons like that.
Okay.
We have found armor like that, though.
Why did God harden their hearts so they all came up against Israel?
I'm so glad that you asked that, because I intentionally put that in there so people can think about that. So we see this line also in the book of Exodus that happens with the Pharaoh. And so in the story of the Exodus, 5 times God gives Pharaoh a chance. And then 5 times God hardens Pharaoh's heart. And so if we follow that pattern, they have been given the chance to turn to God, and now they haven't. And so now God's kind of turning them over into what it is. It's also a way of saying they maybe battled against Israel. Israel didn't just go out to all of that they were. So, but that's one to go home and sit with. Finally, though, the land is going to rest from war. And for the most part, war is done in the book of Joshua. We're going to look at oh man, we suddenly ran out of time for where I wanted us to be. I wanted to show you this picture. This is from a Russian artist. It's called the apotheosis of war. This is to say it's the total ending of war, or what is the result of war. And so he did other war paintings, but I want us to take. We're going to take about a minute and a half, and to just kind of sit with this picture, sit with the story of Joshua, which is a story of war.
It's a little bit hard to see the screen.
I thought it was rocks at first.
Then
once you move, I can see the
It's a painting, not a sculpture.
Yeah.
It is a painting.
Just come on. It is sculpture.
The birds are picking and clean.
Yeah. No, I'll just draw your attention to some things why I like this painting. If you can see it, I don't know if I'm still blocking some of you. Over here is a city. Does anybody have a cough drop?
That's it.
Connie, I would love to.
I moved back, so I was taking.
Okay, I'll get a second. My throat's tired of talking. So this town here, you'll see the walls were broken down. I like it too because thank you. The trees are all dead. So when big armies pass through, they kill all of the grass. When all of the grass is dead, grazing animals have nothing to eat, and they eat the trees, and the trees die. And so I like how this shows the death of the land too. Sometimes we forget the extent that war takes. I'm going to encourage you to look at this for 30 seconds. But honestly, I'm just going to let this melt for a second.
Yet the crows survived. Or will we see the next picture and then we start?
Oh, this is the only painting.
Alexander, I just saw in the news that in the Olympics, one of the Ukrainians in one of the winter sports, I don't remember which one, had painted on his helmet images of some of the people that had been killed by the Russians. He was disqualified.
He was.
He was?
He wanted people to remember all the people that had been killed.
I'd like to know why he was
I'd
disqualified.
like to know why too.
Well, you're not supposed to, it's supposed to be apolitical. Olympics.
But they do it all the time.
Well, you can honor the dead, that's not political.
No, I mean, I don't have a problem with it, but I mean, I think it is supposed to be apolitical.
I agree with that, but just honoring the dead doesn't seem political to me.
Well, it is, it's bringing up the war,
Yeah.
which should
That's-
be brought up. And should be.
I wanted to put this painting here because we come here to Joshua and it's like, oh, look, the wartime is finally done. And there is no victors in war. And so remember the death and destruction. We were going to have a discussion with this, and we're not. And so I'm going to leave you with some food for thought, and then we're going to close out the chapter on the next slide. Also, I'm sorry about my throat. It's gotten
Alexander,
dry.
I need to revisit that, my first question again. Would it be appropriate to say God hardened their hearts, flip it a little and say God gave up on them?
You could.
Because
Let me ask this question first, though, about Joshua. So when we come to a story about Joshua, this is a hard read. And if you're sitting in uncomfortable when you read it, as we said before, that's good. If you have had fun reading this throughout the whole part, maybe some parts are fun, something is wrong with you. Father Christopher and Mother Amy are upstairs, and they do confession. I had a conversation this week with Mother Amy about this and sort of how to have some of the conversations around it. And this is a book of war, and it's the legacy of a war and how people wrestle with that. And so here's some questions I think are good for you to take home. When you read a story like this, for you, do you see this as people trying to give excuse to their war that they had engaged in? And are they attributing these things that God commanded them to do, but it actually came from them? We've talked about that too throughout this. There are warnings even against that kind of limit our own ambition. But when you read this story, ask, is this a human story or is this a God story? And if it's a God story, how do you wrestle with that today? Those are good questions to ask when you read Joshua. I would also just like to leave this reminder. We think as Western people that, or oftentimes we think this, and I grew up thinking this about the Bible, that we read things to end the conversation because they have answers. The scriptures are written to begin the conversation. It's written to get you to think. So when you read a passage like, their hearts are hardened, I can ask questions. Well, did God harden their hearts? Is my heart hardened? What does that mean to have my heart hardened? Did I have a chance before? Has God given up on me? Is there still forgiveness for me? These are all questions to keep asking, particularly in these moments about war and how we think about that for war today and how you think about what your calling is when you find yourself in a time of war or discomfort or sides or distrust. Where do you line up into that? I'm sorry we don't have time for a full conversation. We will come back at the end. We'll have time to have a conversation like that. I will make sure of it. I want to come to chapter 12, though. I put this as a fun fact, in the back. This is falling apart in my mouth. And war was a lot more common in the ancient world. It's a lot more common a generation before my generation. I have not grown up in a world that has experienced lots of war. I have been sad that in the last 12 years, there has been more war in our world than there has been in the last 20 years. Those things are hard for me to sit with. It is a lot more common, though, in the ancient world. And so sometimes we will read text like what we're going to see in chapter 12, which is a description of all of the battles. You can think of this as like a land title. If you're like a nation, you would have rights to a place if you defeated it in war, because that was a way of showing you deserved it, you won it. That's not exactly the world, at least it's not the world I hope that we live in today. But that is what this is. And so we're going to get a description of all that's here. So the very first 6 verses, which are written in prose, we're going to get the legacy of Moses, which he battled the 2 kings, the king at Bashan, which is up here, and then Og, which is over here in Ammon. We get kind of a large one. And then if you read it, this is how the structure is. The king of Jericho, 1. The king of Ai, which is next to Bethel, 1. The king of Jerusalem, 1. So I have this organized here in sort of how these battles took place, roughly following the order in the Bible. And so, and then here's all of the towns that are going to get mentioned on this map. So the central one, the first campaign is through Jericho and Ai. Then there is Jerusalem. The ones that are underlined lead the coalition. I was going to read, I have a description of where every single city is and what their role was, but it took me like 3.5 minutes to read it last night, and nobody seemed interested, and I don't think my throat's going to last that long either. But if you are interested, I can copy my notes that are like multiple pages, and I can send it to you.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
I'm using the New Revised Standard Version, and when you're looking at chapter 12 and they're listing all the kings, next to it has the word one, O-N-E.
Yes.
And I'm trying, what does that mean?
So, and look in verse 7, and Joshua gave their land to the tribes of Israel as a possession according to their allotments. It's their allotment. So because they have, first it's poetry.
Okay.
So, but it's reading their allotment. So they defeated Bethel, that's 1 allotment. Ai, 1.
Okay, the
Jerusalem,
lots.
1.
Okay, got it.
And there's 31 in total.
That makes sense.
I'm going to leave this as another food for thought for you. I'm not really sure where our times seem to evaporate, but we had good discussions today. So in the north, Joshua faced this army so big, it looked like sand on a beach. What is for you a sand on the seashore problem in your life right now? Something that feels too large to even count, let alone overcome. I had fun talking about this with the group last night. Remember, walls can come down. And even though things might seem as big as they are now, God usually has a way of solving those. This is where we are. We have finished the battles through the book of Joshua. Thank the Lord. Okay, next week we will do our Ash Wednesday conversation, and we're going to come back. We're going to do chapters 13 through 21. Don't read it unless you want to do that as part of your Lenten punishment. Because it's like absolutely horrible. I will read it for you, and we will summarize it, and we will have some discussions. I don't think we're going to have the war discussion. Was not my plan to have that for that week, but I will see if I can fit that in and make time for that. If not, we'll do it at the very last week. But do come next week for Ash Wednesday, whether you come Wednesday night or Thursday. I hope to see you there. Come and get ashes. Begin your Lenten preparations for Easter. And continue to think about Joshua. Remember, it starts the conversation. Take these conversations home. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
My God, we thank you for difficult texts that keep us up at night. May we learn to meditate on your words day and night. May we learn to have conversations with one another even when they're difficult. May we learn to put our neck out for others even when we don't trust or like them. May we learn to become the people of God. Amen.
Amen.
Yes.
I apologize for being a little late. We're meeting next Thursday here at 11 o'clock. We're meeting here.
We will meet in here. Yes, and then we will march upstairs.
Thank you. I apologize.